The stranger in the expensive suit sat in Alara Mitchell's living room like he owned it. Maybe he did now. Your father owed Mr. Blackwood $3.7 million, Vincent Gray said, sliding a folder across her coffee table. Falsified financial statements, diverted funds, forged signatures, all documented here. Alara's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Spreadsheets, bank statements, and her father's signature on documents she'd never seen before. Her parents had been dead for only 3 months. The small insurance payout barely covered the funeral expenses, and now this? This can't be right, she whispered, though the evidence seemed irrefutable. My father was an accountant. He helped people save for retirement, for college funds. Gray's smile never reached his eyes. He also helped himself to Mr. Blackwood's money. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Me? I work at a library. I make $32,000 a year, which is why Mr. Blackwood is offering an alternative arrangement. He produced another document, this one only 2 pages. 1 year of service in his household, and the debt will be considered paid. Alara pushed the contract away. Service? What kind of service? Mr. Blackwood requires a companion for certain social events. Someone educated, presentable. Gray's eyes tracked down her body. You fit his parameters. And if I refuse? The FBI receives this evidence tomorrow morning. You'll be implicated as well. Several transfers were made to an account in your name after your parents' accident. The room seemed to tilt. That's impossible. I never. The paperwork suggests otherwise. Gray stood, straightening his tie. Consider your options carefully, Ms. Mitchell. Prison for fraud, or 1 year in a mansion in Aspen. Mr. Blackwood is a demanding employer, but the accommodations are exceptional. He placed a business card on top of the contract. You have 24 hours to decide. After he left, Alara sat frozen, staring at the documents. Had her father really committed these crimes? The man who'd taught her about integrity, who'd worked overtime to pay for her college education. It seemed impossible. Yet the evidence was meticulously detailed. She called Karen, her father's former assistant. I can't believe Robert would do something like that, Karen said when Alara explained. But Blackwood Enterprises. Alara, be careful. There were rumors about the women Maxwell Blackwood keeps in his orbit. They tend to disappear. What do you mean, disappear? Last year, there was a girl, Vanessa something, worked as his date for events. After 6 months, she just vanished. No social media, no forwarding address. Alara's throat tightened. And the police? Blackwood owns half the state officials in Colorado. Look, whatever you decide, leave a digital trail. Tell people where you're going. 23 hours later, Alara stood in her apartment, a small suitcase at her feet. She'd spent the night researching Maxwell Blackwood, tech prodigy turned ruthless CEO, known for destroying competitors and collecting art and women with equal dispassion. His company, Blackwood Enterprises, had revolutionized security systems, but rumors of questionable practices shadowed his success. Her phone rang. Gray, your decision, Ms. Mitchell? Alara looked around her apartment, at the framed photo of her parents, at the bookcases filled with stories of people overcoming impossible odds. If her father had stolen from Blackwood, she needed to understand why. If he hadn't, if this was some elaborate scheme, she needed to find proof. I'll do it, she said. 1 year. Then the debt is cleared and all evidence destroyed. Excellent. A car will arrive in 30 minutes. Pack lightly. Everything you need will be provided. Alara hung up and opened her laptop one last time, typing a scheduled email to her best friend Maya. If you don't hear from me weekly, contact this reporter at the Denver Post who's been investigating Blackwood. The password to my cloud drive is the name of the character we both loved in 3rd grade plus the year we graduated. Everything I know is there. She sent the email, then took a deep breath. 1 year to clear her father's name. 1 year to discover the truth. The black SUV arrived precisely on time. The driver, silent and efficient, placed her suitcase in the trunk while Alara locked her apartment for what might be the last time. As they headed toward the private airfield, she caught the driver watching her in the rearview mirror. First time to Aspen? He asked. First time anywhere, she replied. Is Mr. Blackwood a good employer? The driver's expression remained neutral. He values competence above all else. And the women who work for him, do they find him fair? His eyes flicked to hers in the mirror, then away. You'll meet Mr. Blackwood soon enough. Form your own opinions. Alara turned to watch Silverwood Springs disappear behind them, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake, or the first step toward uncovering the truth. The helicopter crested another snow-covered peak, revealing a structure that seemed to emerge from the mountain itself, a modernist vision of glass, steel, and stone. Alara pressed her hand against the window, counting 5 distinct wings sprawling across the ridge. Impressive, isn't it? Harper Winters, Blackwood's executive assistant, adjusted her designer glasses. The east wing houses the labs, west is residential, center contains the common areas and Mr. Blackwood's office. For the past hour, Harper had briefed Alara on protocols, when to speak, rarely, where she could go, limited areas, and what was expected, absolute compliance. Now she handed Alara a tablet. Your complete orientation package. Memorize it before dinner. Alara scrolled through dress codes and behavioral guidelines until reaching a section labeled Predecessors. 3 women, all in their 20s. Sophia Ellis, Vanessa Chun, and Amara Washington. These women, Alara began. Harper smoothly reclaimed the tablet. Mr. Blackwood's previous social companions. Their contracts concluded satisfactorily. Where are they now? Harper's perfect smile tightened. Focus on your own arrangement, Ms. Mitchell. It will make the year more productive. The helicopter touched down on a private pad. 2 security guards met them, escorting them through glass doors into a soaring atrium dominated by a 15-foot ice sculpture of a phoenix. This way, Harper directed. Mr. Blackwood is concluding a call. They followed a curved hallway lined with modern art until reaching a sleek office suite. Harper knocked once before entering. Sir, Ms. Mitchell has arrived. Maxwell Blackwood stood with his back to them, gazing at the mountains through a wall of glass. He turned slowly, tall, with precisely cut dark hair and eyes the cold blue of a glacier. In person, he looked younger than his 35 years, though the intensity in his gaze belonged to someone who'd seen far more of the world's darkness than light. He assessed Alara silently, his expression revealing nothing. Leave us, Harper. When the door closed, Blackwood gestured to a chair. Please sit. Alara remained standing. I'd prefer clarification on a few points in our arrangement. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly controlled. Unusual. Most people in your position are too intimidated to make demands. I'm not making demands. I'm seeking clarity. Blackwood leaned against his desk. Very well. Ask. The 3 women before me. Where are they? Their contracts were fulfilled. They moved on. To where? That's not your concern. His tone remained level, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Next question. Alara stepped closer. My father. I want to see the original evidence of his fraud. The documents you reviewed were comprehensive. They were copies. I want to see originals, bank statements, signatures. If I'm trading a year of my life, I deserve to know exactly what crime I'm paying for. Blackwood studied her with new interest. Your file didn't indicate this level of assertiveness. My file. He moved to a touchscreen panel, pulled up a document. Alara Mitchell, 22, BA in Library Science from Colorado State. Employed at Silverwood Springs Public Library for 14 months. Lives alone. No serious relationships. Preferred reading, historical fiction and technical manuals. Unusual combination. You've been watching me? I research all potential acquisitions thoroughly. I'm not an acquisition. I'm a person fulfilling a debt. Blackwood's mouth curved slightly. Semantics. The reality is, you're here to perform a service. How difficult that service becomes depends entirely on your cooperation. He returned to the window. Your quarters are in the West Wing. Harper will show you. You'll find a wardrobe selected to my specifications. Tonight, we have dinner with the board of directors. Wear the blue dress. Your role is to be attentive, pleasant, and silent unless directly addressed. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we'll discuss your father's case. If you perform adequately tonight. He pressed an intercom. Harper, show Ms. Mitchell to her room. As Harper led her through labyrinthine hallways, Alara memorized each turn, noting security cameras and keycard access points. Her room, a spacious suite overlooking the valley, contained a walk-in closet filled with designer clothing, all in her size. How did he know my measurements? She asked. Harper's smile was practiced. Mr. Blackwood is thorough. Dinner is at 7. The blue dress is marked. When Harper left, Alara searched the room methodically. She found 2 cameras, one by the door, another near the windows, and a tablet programmed with mansion maps showing her permitted areas in green, restricted zones in red. The bathroom held luxury toiletries, but no cameras she could detect. In the shower, with water running to mask any recording devices, Alara finally allowed herself a moment of panic. What had she gotten herself into? Was there any way out if things went wrong? The blue dress fit perfectly. a silk sheath that suggested curves without revealing them. Conservative yet elegant. As instructed, she arrived in the dining room at exactly 7. Blackwood stood at the head of a 12-person table, conversing with an older man in a bespoke suit. When he spotted her, something flashed across his face. Approval, perhaps, or merely satisfaction at her compliance. "Directors, may I present Alara Mitchell, my guest for the evening." The introductions blurred together. Board members, executives, their spouses. Alara smiled, shook hands, spoke only when addressed directly. Throughout dinner, she observed how Blackwood controlled the room, how others deferred to him even when disagreeing. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Ms. Mitchell works in information sciences," Blackwood said when the conversation turned to their new security platform. "Perhaps she has insights on user interface challenges." All eyes turned to her. "A test, then." "The most elegant security systems balance protection with accessibility," she said carefully. "Users bypass systems that frustrate them, creating vulnerabilities." The technology director nodded appreciatively. "Exactly the issue we're facing with the Aurea project." Blackwood watched her with that same enigmatic expression. "Indeed. Perhaps Ms. Mitchell will join our discussion tomorrow." After dinner, he escorted her toward the residential wing. "You performed adequately," he said. "Though your comment about security systems was unexpected, you invited the input as a test of your ability to follow instructions, speaking only when spoken to." "Which I did." They reached her door. Blackwood stood too close, his cologne, subtle notes of cedar and something darker, enveloping her. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. We'll review your father's case as promised." He studied her face. "You're not what I expected, Alara Mitchell." "Neither are you, Mr. Blackwood." "Maxwell," he corrected. "If we're to convince the world you're my romantic interest, we should use first names." The implications of his statement settled between them like a weight. "Good night, Maxwell," she said, slipping into her room before he could respond. Alone again, Alara pressed her forehead against the cool door. "One day down, 364 to go. These are your father's original bank statements," Maxwell said, sliding several documents across his desk. "Note the transfer patterns to this offshore account, then to your personal savings." Alara examined the papers with growing unease. The transactions looked legitimate, regular transfers over 8 months, all bearing her father's signature. "Except, this isn't his handwriting," she said, pointing to his signature. "The R is wrong. My father always looped his R differently." Maxwell took the paper back, studying it. "People change their signatures. Not my father. He was obsessive about consistency." She pulled out her phone, found a birthday card photo. "See? The authentic signature." Something flickered in Maxwell's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or irritation at being challenged. These documents were authenticated by experts. Experts can be wrong, or paid to be wrong. His jaw tightened. "Careful, Alara. Accusations without evidence are dangerous. So is imprisonment for someone else's crime." For a tense moment, they stared at each other across the desk. Then Maxwell's intercom buzzed. "Sir, the Japanese investors have arrived early. We'll continue this later," he said, standing. "The dinner tonight is crucial for the Aurea project's funding. Wear the emerald gown. My car leaves at 7. After he left, Alara photographed the documents with her phone, then continued her morning as instructed. A training session with Harper on appropriate social behaviors. Lunch served in her room. An afternoon familiarizing herself with Maxwell's business interests. The emerald dress, like everything in her closet, fit perfectly. A sleek column of fabric that transformed her librarian's figure into something elegant. The attached note specified minimal jewelry and hair pulled back. Even her appearance belonged to him now. The restaurant occupied the mansion's top floor, a glass-enclosed space offering panoramic mountain views. Maxwell introduced her to the Japanese delegation as "my partner," his hand resting possessively at the small of her back. She played her role flawlessly through appetizers and main courses, smiling at appropriate moments, contributing brief comments when addressed. Until Maxwell began his presentation on the Aurea project. "Our security algorithm creates an impenetrable shield against external penetration," he explained, displaying complex matrices on the table-side screens. "All access points are continuously monitored and adapted in real time." Something in the data caught Alara's attention, a pattern in the defense matrix that contradicted itself. "Excuse me," she interrupted as Maxwell described the system's 99.8% effectiveness rate. But there's an inconsistency in the sequential node protection. The table fell silent. Maxwell's expression froze. The pattern creates a recursive loop, she continued, pointing to the screen. If someone inserted a mirrored response code at this junction, they could create a feedback loop that would crash the system. The lead investor, Takahashi, leaned forward. You are security specialist also? Before Maxwell could intervene, Alara answered. I study systems, how they function, their vulnerabilities. This one has a structural weakness. Takahashi turned to Maxwell. Your partner sees what your engineers missed? Impressive. The tension in Maxwell's jaw could have cracked granite, but he recovered smoothly. Alara has an exceptional mind for patterns. It's why we make such effective partners. Later, as they rode the elevator down in silence, Alara braced for his anger. Instead, he asked, where did you learn to identify algorithmic vulnerabilities? Books. The library received technical manuals from the community college. I read them during slow shifts. You taught yourself advanced security protocols from outdated textbooks. I have a good memory for patterns. The elevator stopped at the lab level. Come with me, he said. The laboratory sprawled across an entire wing. Workstations, servers, and screens displaying code sequences. A dozen engineers looked up in surprise as Maxwell led her inside. Thomas. Maxwell addressed a man with disheveled gray hair. Run scenario Delta 7 with the modification Ms. Mitchell suggested. While Thomas typed, Maxwell explained, if you've identified a legitimate vulnerability, you've saved us millions in potential breaches. The simulation ran, and the system crashed exactly as Alara had predicted. Holy shit, Thomas whispered. She's right. Maxwell turned to Alara, his expression unreadable. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. You'll work with Thomas to patch this vulnerability. That wasn't our arrangement. Our arrangement is evolving. Your talents are wasted as a mere social accessory. For the next 3 weeks, Alara's days followed a new pattern. Mornings in the lab identifying weaknesses in the Aurea project, evenings accompanying Maxwell to business functions. Though he never acknowledged it directly, her status subtly shifted. Staff addressed her with new respect. Her restricted areas on the tablet decreased. During a charity gala in downtown Aspen, she met Declan Reed for the first time, Maxwell's right-hand man, recently returned from overseas operations. Tall, with sandy hair and a disarming smile, he approached while Maxwell spoke with donors. So you're the library girl who cracked our algorithm, Reed said, offering champagne. Max doesn't usually allow his companions such proximity to company matters. I'm not a companion. No? What would you call your arrangement? Temporary. Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. They all say that at first. He leaned closer. Just between us. How did you really spot that vulnerability? No self-taught librarian identifies quantum encryption flaws. Perhaps you underestimate librarians. Perhaps you overestimate how long Max's fascination will last. Before she could respond, Maxwell appeared at her side. Reed, I see you've met Alara. The tension between the men was subtle but unmistakable. Just welcoming her to the inner circle, Reed said. Unusual choice, bringing her into Aurea. Alara has proven her value. Maxwell's hand settled on her waist, a clear signal of possession. The Tokyo team was impressed with her insights. That night, unable to sleep, Alara used her lab access to investigate the company's servers. If her father had actually committed fraud, there would be internal records. She found nothing about her father, but discovered multiple references to something called Project Phoenix, separate from Aurea, but apparently equally important to Maxwell. When she tried to access the Phoenix files, a security protocol activated. Curious about things that don't concern you? She whirled to find Maxwell standing in the darkened doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm curious about my father's alleged crimes, she countered. There's no record of him in your system. Those records are stored separately, or they don't exist. Maxwell stepped closer. You've been productive with Aurea. Don't jeopardize that by overstepping. I'm here because of my father's debt. I deserve to know the truth. Something in his expression shifted. The truth isn't always what we expect, Alara. Try me. Maxwell studied her for a long moment, then made a decision. Project Phoenix. You want to know what it is? Yes. It's protection. Insurance. He moved to a terminal, entered a complex code. A schematic appeared, what looked like a medical facility embedded in a mountainside. And it may be the most important project of my career. What does it have to do with my father? Or me? Everything. He turned to face her. But before I explain further, I need to know if I can trust you. Trust works both ways. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Indeed it does. He closed the file. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll discuss Project Phoenix and what really happened to your father. As Alara returned to her room, she felt the mansion's atmosphere had shifted. Something fundamental had changed between them, balancing on the knife's edge between threat and promise. Snow fell outside Maxwell's office windows as he pulled up Project Phoenix files on his secure terminal. Alara sat across from him, watching his face rather than the screen. 7 years ago, he began. Blackwood Enterprises was primarily a data security company, small but growing. Then I discovered something disturbing. One of our clients was using our systems to track and transport women across international borders. Human trafficking, Alara said. Maxwell nodded. Once I recognized the pattern, I found it everywhere. Shell companies, diplomatic covers, private transportation networks. An entire shadow industry protected by powerful people. So you reported it? His laugh held no humor. To whom? Many of these operations had protection from officials I would have reported to. He gestured to the screen, which showed what appeared to be a secure database. Instead, I built this, Project Phoenix, a protected digital vault containing evidence against trafficking networks worldwide. Alara frowned. What does this have to do with my father? Your father was an accountant for Tri-State Investment Group, a legitimate financial firm. A front. Their legitimate business generated only 30% of their revenue. The rest came from providing financial services to criminal enterprises, including trafficking networks. Alara shook her head. That's impossible. My father would never. He didn't know, not initially. When he discovered discrepancies and began investigating, he contacted me anonymously. Maxwell pulled up an email chain. He'd read about my testimony against Brighton Holdings, another trafficking front. He wanted to help. If he was helping you, why forge evidence against him after his death? Maxwell leaned back. I didn't forge anything, Alara. The debt story was a cover, not for your father's crimes, but for his heroism. The real danger wasn't prison, but the people who would kill you if they knew you were Robert Mitchell's daughter. The revelation hit Alara like physical pain. My parents' accident wasn't an accident. Tri-State discovered your father was gathering evidence. They eliminated him before he could testify. Maxwell's eyes held genuine sympathy. When I learned of his death, I began monitoring you, the last living connection to a crucial whistleblower. You've been watching me for 3 months, protecting you. Tri-State executives still don't know how much information Robert gathered or where he stored it. Alara's mind raced through implications. The contract, the debt, it was all theater to provide a believable reason for bringing you here. Safety through proximity to power. Why not tell me the truth from the beginning? Would you have believed me? A stranger claiming your father was killed by traffickers. He shook his head. You needed to see evidence for yourself, make your own assessment. She stood, pacing the office. So I'm not actually paying off a debt. You're not obligated to stay, if that's what you're asking. Though I recommend you do, for your safety. And the other women, Sophia, Vanessa, Amara, were they also protected here? Something closed in Maxwell's expression. Their situations were different. Different how? That's not relevant to your situation. It seems extremely relevant. Maxwell stood. What matters now is your father's work remains unfinished. We never found his complete evidence cache. If it still exists, you're the most likely person to know where he would have hidden it. Alara processed this new reality. Her father as hero, not criminal. Her captor as protector, not villain. Yet something still felt wrong. I need time to think. Of course, your lab access remains active. The Aurea project benefits from your insights, regardless of your decision about Phoenix. Over the following weeks, Alara maintained her dual role, security consultant by day, social companion by night. She searched for inconsistencies in Maxwell's story while contributing genuine improvements to Aurea's architecture. During a corporate reception in Denver, she found herself alone with Declan Reed at the bar. Heard you've been granted Phoenix access, he said, sipping scotch. Max must be smitten. It's not romantic. It's professional. Reed's smile was knowing. Max doesn't separate the two. Once you're in his inner circle, you serve all purposes. Speaking from experience, speaking as his oldest friend, I've watched his pattern with the others. What happened to them? Specifically, Reed glanced around before leaning closer. Sophia got too close to something she shouldn't have. Vanessa asked too many questions. Amara, he shrugged. Amara simply outlived her usefulness. You're implying Maxwell hurt them. I'm saying power corrupts, even the best intentions. He slipped her a keycard. Server room B, cabinet 12. If you want the truth about Phoenix and the women, look there. But be careful. Surveillance gaps last only 10 minutes during system updates at 2 a.m. That night, after returning to the mansion, Alara debated using Reed's keycard. Maxwell's explanation about her father seemed plausible, even likely. Yet he'd been evasive about the other women. What was he hiding? At 1:55 a.m., she made her decision. Using Reed's keycard, she accessed server room B during the system update. Cabinet 12 contained a separate terminal requiring biometric authentication. Reed had anticipated this. A note taped inside the cabinet provided an admin override code. The file she found chilled her blood. Medical records for Sophia, Vanessa, and Amara, genetic profiles, tissue samples, clinical trials, notes about genomic compatibility, and experimental protocols. A map marked a remote facility in the mountains, separate from any Blackwood Enterprises property she knew about. These women hadn't been protected. They'd been studied. She photographed everything with her phone, then carefully replaced all files and returned to her room, mind racing. What was Maxwell really doing? Was Phoenix truly about fighting trafficking, or something darker? The next morning, Maxwell announced a major charity gala in downtown Aspen, requiring their attendance. Governor Collins confirmed, along with 3 senators, he said over breakfast. Wear the black gown. We'll depart at 7. Alara saw her opportunity. A public event meant confusion, multiple exits, witnesses. She could escape, take her evidence to authorities, assuming any weren't already in Maxwell's pocket. The gala filled the Aspen Grande Hotel ballroom with Colorado's elite. While Maxwell spoke with the governor, Alara excused herself to the ladies' room, then slipped toward a service exit. She'd almost reached freedom when a hand gripped her arm. Running away so soon? Declan Reed's voice carried false concern. The night's just beginning. Let go of me. Can't do that. You've seen things you shouldn't have. Fear spiked through her. Maxwell will notice I'm missing. Max is occupied with the governor for at least 20 minutes. Reed steered her toward a service elevator. Plenty of time to disappear. Don't worry. You'll be joining your predecessors soon enough. He forced her into a waiting car. As they pulled away from the hotel, Alara realized with growing horror that Reed hadn't helped her expose Maxwell. He'd manipulated her into revealing herself as a threat. Where are you taking me? Reed checked his watch. To the real Phoenix facility. You've earned a permanent place in the project. The car climbed a winding mountain road, wipers struggling against the intensifying snowfall. Alara assessed her options. The doors were locked, and Reed kept one hand near what she suspected was a concealed weapon. Whatever you think Maxwell is doing, you're wrong, she said, trying to buy time. Reed's laugh held genuine amusement. No, Alara. Whatever you think Maxwell is doing, you're wrong. He glanced at her. Did you actually believe that Nobility Act? The crusade against trafficking? Max is brilliant, but his moral awakening was my best creation. Your creation? Max built security systems. I showed him their true potential. The car turned onto an unmarked road. Imagine having access to the genetic profiles of thousands of women through our security contracts with health clinics. The ability to identify rare genetic markers. To select for specific traits. Revulsion rose in Alara's throat. You're experimenting on women. We're advancing human evolution. Those trafficking victims Max supposedly saved? Research subjects with ideal genetic sequences. Reed checked his phone. Your father discovered our selection algorithm. Started asking questions. So you killed him. Business necessity. Nothing personal. Alara's mind raced. If Reed was telling the truth, everything Maxwell had shared was a lie. If Reed was lying, the facility came into view. A bunker-like structure embedded in the mountainside, its entrance illuminated by security lights. 2 guards approached as the car stopped. Bring her to Lab 3, Reed instructed them. Dr. Mercer is waiting. As the guards reached for her, Alara launched herself across the seat, slamming her elbow into Reed's throat. She grabbed his phone, kicked open the car door, and ran into the snowy forest. Behind her, Reed wheezed orders to the guards. Gunshots cracked through the night. Alara zigzagged between trees, snow soaking through her evening slippers, the thin gown offering no protection against the biting cold. She needed to call for help. But who? Maxwell, who might be behind everything. The police, who might be compromised. Using Reed's phone, she dialed the one number she'd memorized during her investigation. Thomas, the head engineer. Reed? Thomas answered. It's Alara. Reed kidnapped me. We're at some facility in the mountains. What? Where's Maxwell? Still at the gala, I think. Thomas. Reed says Maxwell is running genetic experiments on women. Is that possible? Thomas's shock seemed genuine. Jesus, no. Maxwell shut down those proposals years ago. Reed wanted to use our health records to identify genetic markers, but Maxwell refused. Where exactly are you? Alara described what she could see through the falling snow. Flashlight beams swept through trees behind her. I know that place, Thomas said urgently. It's an old data storage facility. Maxwell sold it years ago. Alara, stay hidden. I'll contact Maxwell immediately. The call ended as a spotlight caught her. Alara dove behind a fallen tree, wet snow plastering her gown to her skin, teeth chattering violently. The spotlight passed, then returned, fixing on her position. She ran again, but her numb feet betrayed her. She stumbled, fell, rolled down an embankment. Pain lanced through her ankle. The guards caught up easily, dragging her back to the facility. Inside, clinical white corridors led to a laboratory where a man in a white coat waited. Dr. Mercer, Reed said, our newest subject has arrived. Mercer frowned at Alara's condition. She's hypothermic. Prep her for warming before any procedures. They stripped her shivering body, replacing the gown with a hospital garment. Through a glass partition, Alara saw other women in hospital beds, including one she recognized as Vanessa Chun from the photographs. The others? She asked through chattering teeth. Recovering from initial procedures, Mercer answered clinically. You'll join them once we've completed your intake assessment. Reed checked his watch. Maxwell will notice she's missing soon. Accelerate the timeline. The snowstorm that had begun the night of Alara's abduction turned into a historic blizzard, isolating the mountain regions of Aspen for 3 days. Rescue had come dramatically. Maxwell and a security team blasting through the facility's doors minutes before Dr. Mercer could begin his procedures. The confrontation between Maxwell and Reed ended with Reed's escape through an emergency tunnel, while Maxwell carried a semi-conscious Alara through the snow to a waiting helicopter. Now, watching snowflakes melt against her bedroom window, Alara struggled with what to believe. Maxwell had rescued her, but was it just to protect his investment? Reed's claims about Maxwell's involvement haunted her. The women in the facility, including Vanessa Chun, had been transferred to a private hospital under guard for protection or containment. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Harper with another meal. Instead, Maxwell entered, looking exhausted. For 3 days, he'd kept his distance while she recovered, communicating only through staff. You should be resting, he said, noting her position by the window. I've been in bed for 3 days. I needed to stand. He moved beside her, keeping a careful distance. The roads are clearing. FBI teams will reach the facility tomorrow. And the women? Recovering under protection. Vanessa Chun has regained consciousness. She confirmed Reed was operating the facility independently. Alara studied his face for deception. Why should I believe you over Reed? Hurt flashed across his features. You believe I'm capable of experimenting on innocent women? I don't know what to believe anymore. She turned back to the window. Reed was convincing. He knew details about my father, about Phoenix. Reed was my head of operations for 6 years. He had access to everything, including the evidence your father gathered against Tri-State. Maxwell pressed something into her hand. I should have given you this earlier. It was a weathered leather bookmark embossed with her father's initials. She recognized it immediately. He'd used it in every book he read. Where did you get this? It came with his final message to me, 2 days before his death. A warning that Tri-State had discovered his investigation. Maxwell's voice softened. He mentioned you specifically, asked me to watch over you if anything happened to him. Tears pricked Alara's eyes as she clutched the bookmark. This, at least, felt real. Reed manipulated everything. Maxwell continued. He convinced Tri-State executives your father was gathering evidence. After your parents' death, he positioned you as bait. Bait for what? Any hidden evidence your father might have left. Reed's been searching for it as desperately as I have, but for opposite reasons. Maxwell moved closer. I need to stop human trafficking networks. Reed needs to protect them. His genetic research depends on their supply chains. The pieces aligned with horrible clarity. The facility was sold years ago when we downsized. Reed apparently maintained it secretly. The genetic research proposal he presented to me was rejected, but he clearly continued privately. How did you find me that night? Thomas called me immediately. I was already looking for you at the gala. A muscle in his jaw tightened when I realized Reed was also missing. Alara sank into an armchair, processing everything. The other women were also daughters of whistleblowers. No, Reed selected them based on genetic profiles. women with specific markers he was studying. Their deaths were fabricated, just like yours. But you knew that when you brought me here. I suspected. Maxwell sat across from her. I needed to maintain the charade until I understood Reed's full plan. If I'd revealed everything immediately, I might have fled straight into his trap, she finished. Like I did anyway. The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken truths. During the storm, Ilara said finally, "When you were in the library talking about your mother, was that real?" Something vulnerable crossed his face. "Yes. Everything I've shared with you has been true, Ilara. Incomplete sometimes, but never false." She wanted to believe him. The alternative, that she was still a pawn in an elaborate game, was too painful to consider. "My father's evidence," she said. "I might know where it is." Maxwell straightened. "Where?" "When I was 12, my father built a hidden compartment in our family cabin. It was our secret place for birthday gifts, Christmas presents." She twisted the bookmark in her hands. The cabin was sold after their deaths. But if the compartment wasn't discovered, where is this cabin? Grand Lake. About 3 hours from here. We'll go tomorrow, when the road's clear. Maxwell stood. "Rest tonight. You're still recovering." At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I never intended for any of this to happen. Not your involvement in Phoenix. Not the connection that's grown between us." "What connection is that, exactly?" His eyes met hers. "You tell me." After he left, Ilara remained by the window, watching darkness settle over the mountains. The bookmark in her hand offered tangible proof of her father's connection to Maxwell, but also a painful reminder of how easily truths could be manipulated. Tomorrow they would visit the cabin, search for evidence that might finally separate fact from fiction. Until then, she was left with only her instincts to guide her. And her instincts, despite everything, still pulled her toward Maxwell. In the corridor outside her room, unseen by Ilara, Maxwell leaned against the wall, conflict evident in his expression. He checked his phone. A message from security confirming Reed had last been tracked to the Denver airport. A second message from Thomas reporting progress on strengthening Orea's defenses against potential attacks. Maxwell typed a response, then stared at Ilara's door for a long moment before walking away, the weight of unshared secrets evident in his posture. The cabin stood unchanged, a modest 2-bedroom structure overlooking Grand Lake, now blanketed in snow. Ilara hesitated on the porch, memories washing over her. Summer fishing with her father, reading by the fireplace while her mother cooked, board games on rainy days. "The realtor left the key under this rock," she said, retrieving it. "The new owners don't take possession until spring." Inside, the furniture remained draped in sheets, family photos long removed. Ilara moved directly to the stone fireplace, kneeling to run her fingers along the base molding. "The compartment is behind this panel," she explained, pressing a specific spot. "There's a trick to it." Maxwell watched as she manipulated the wood trim. With a soft click, a section of the fireplace facing swung outward, revealing a small cavity. Inside lay a single USB drive. "That's it?" Maxwell asked. Ilara nodded, handing it to him. "My father was practical. Digital, portable, easily hidden." Maxwell examined the drive. "Let's see what was worth killing for." They connected it to Ilara's laptop. The drive contained hundreds of financial records, offshore accounts, transaction logs, client lists, all meticulously documented with Robert Mitchell's precise notes. "My God," Maxwell murmured, scrolling through the files. "This is everything. Financial infrastructure for 3 major trafficking networks across 15 countries. My father knew all this. He pieced it together over months. These banking patterns, they're identical to ones I'd identified through Phoenix, but he had names, dates, specific transactions." Maxwell looked at her with genuine admiration. "Your father was extraordinary." Pride mingled with grief as Ilara studied her father's work. "Now what?" "Now we complete what he started." Maxwell pulled out a secure phone. "I'm contacting my FBI liaison. With this evidence, we can dismantle these networks permanently." While he stepped outside to make the call, Ilara continued exploring the files. Beyond the financial records, she found a personal folder labeled Eleanor, her mother's name. Inside was a video file dated 3 days before her parents' accident. Her hand trembled as she clicked play. Her father's familiar face filled the screen, looking tired but determined. "Ilara, if you're watching this, something has happened to your mother and me. The information I've gathered puts us at risk, but it's too important to destroy." He glanced over his shoulder, then continued urgently. "I've reached out to someone who can help. Maxwell Blackwood. If I can't complete this investigation, he will. Trust him, sweetheart. Despite his reputation, he's one of the good ones. Tears blurred her vision as her father continued, explaining the financial networks he'd uncovered, the connections to trafficking operations, and most importantly, his suspicions about Declan Reed. Reed approached me months ago, offering to buy my silence. When I refused, the threats began. If anything happens to us, he's responsible. The video ended with her father's final words, "I love you, Alara. Stay smart. Stay safe." Maxwell returned to find her wiping tears away. "There's more," she said quietly, playing the video for him. Maxwell watched in silence, his expression darkening at the mention of Reed's name. "He knew," he said when the video ended. "Your father knew Reed was corrupt long before I did." He cursed softly. "I promoted Reed, trusted him with everything. My father trusted you." Alara closed the laptop. "He said to trust you too." Their eyes met. Something shifted between them, a barrier dissolving, replaced by fragile understanding. The moment was interrupted by Maxwell's phone ringing. "The FBI team is en route," he said after answering. "They'll meet us back at." An explosion rocked the cabin, shattering windows and knocking them both to the floor. Maxwell covered Alara with his body as glass rained down. "Reed," he hissed, dragging her toward the back door. "He must have tracked us." They burst outside to find two armed men approaching through the trees. Maxwell pulled his weapon, firing cover shots as they ran toward the SUV. Glass exploded beside Alara's head as a bullet struck the vehicle. Maxwell shoved her into the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life as more bullets peppered the car. "Bulletproof glass," he explained, accelerating down the snow-covered drive. "Standard precaution." In the rearview mirror, Alara saw more men emerging from the trees. "They're everywhere." Reed came prepared. Maxwell's voice remained steady as he navigated the icy road. "Call Thomas. Speed dial 1. Alara pressed the button. Thomas answered immediately. "We're compromised," Maxwell said. "Reed found us. Track my location and send the security team." "Already dispatched," Thomas replied. "But they're 20 minutes out. We need an alternative route back." Reed's men have the main road covered. "There's a service road 5 miles ahead on your right. It connects to Highway 40. Maxwell ended the call, pressing the accelerator harder. "We need to reach that turnoff." A black SUV appeared behind them, gaining quickly. "Hold on," Maxwell warned, swerving abruptly onto a narrow forest road. The pursuing vehicle followed, but struggled with the tight turns. They burst from the trees onto a wider road, momentarily losing their pursuer. Maxwell checked the GPS. Service road should be just ahead. As they rounded a curve, an SUV suddenly blocked the road. Maxwell slammed the brakes, sending them into a controlled skid. He turned sharply, choosing a different route through the trees. "The cabin was a trap," he said grimly. "Reed knew we'd go there." "How?" "Your father's bookmark. It wasn't among his personal effects when I received them." Maxwell glanced at her. "Reed planted it, knowing I'd give it to you." Betrayal cut through Alara. Even her father's keepsake had been a manipulation. The narrow path suddenly opened onto a small clearing where a helicopter waited. Reed stood beside it, flanked by armed guards and Dr. Mercer. Maxwell braked hard, reversing, but another SUV blocked their retreat. "End of the line," Reed called through a megaphone. "Exit the vehicle, or my men will extract you." Maxwell cursed, mind racing. "The evidence is too important. We can't let Reed get it." Alara clutched the laptop. "What do we do?" "When I move, stay behind me." Maxwell checked his weapon. "Our security team is coming, but we need to stall." They stepped from the vehicle, Maxwell positioning himself in front of Alara. Reed approached, smiling coldly. The dynamic duo reunited. "How touching." "It's over, Reed," Maxwell said. "The FBI has the evidence. Bluffing doesn't suit you, Max." Reed gestured to the laptop Alara clutched. "We both know what's on that drive. Your careers as crusaders ends today." Dr. Mercer stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm afraid our interrupted session requires completion." "You're not touching her," Maxwell growled. Reed sighed dramatically. "Still playing the hero? After everything, you still don't get it." He turned to Alara. "Has he told you why he really started Phoenix? Why he's so obsessed with trafficking victims?" "Don't," Maxwell warned. "His mother wasn't just poor, she was property, sold to pay family debts, passed between owners until she escaped, pregnant with little Max." Reed's smile was venomous. "He doesn't care about those women. He's just dealing with mommy issues." Maxwell's expression remained stone, but Alara saw the truth in his eyes. Enough talk, Reed snapped. The laptop. Now. The files are already uploaded to a secure server, Alara lied. You're too late. Reed studied her face, then laughed. Nice try. He nodded to his men. Get the laptop. Kill him. Take her. As the men advanced, the distant sound of helicopter rotors cut through the air. Reed glanced up. Expecting company? Maxwell smiled. Right on time. The distraction gave Maxwell the opening he needed. He fired at Reed, grabbing Alara and pulling her toward the tree line as chaos erupted. Bullets splintered trees as Maxwell pulled Alara deeper into the forest. Behind them, Reed shouted orders over the approaching helicopter. We need to separate, Maxwell said, breathing hard. They want you alive. Me, they'll kill on sight. I'm not leaving you, Alara insisted. The evidence is what matters. He pressed a small device into her hand. Satellite beacon. Activate it when you're clear. A bullet struck the tree beside them. Maxwell returned fire, creating cover as they ran. The laptop weighed heavily in Alara's backpack, each step carrying her father's final work further from Reed's grasp. The forest opened onto a frozen creek bed. Maxwell stumbled, red blossoming on his jacket sleeve. You're hit, Alara gasped. Keep moving, he urged, pushing himself up. His face paled with pain, but determination hardened his features. They crossed the creek as Blackwood security helicopters roared overhead. Reed's men scattered, some firing upward, others continuing the pursuit. Maxwell suddenly shoved Alara behind a fallen tree. Stay down. Two of Reed's men emerged from the trees ahead. Maxwell fired twice, hitting one. The other returned fire, forcing them to retreat. This way, Maxwell directed, leading her toward a steep ravine. There's a maintenance tunnel for the lake pumping station. Used it during a hiking trip years ago. They half-slid down the embankment, Maxwell's injured arm leaving a trail of blood on the snow. At the bottom, a small concrete structure housed a metal door, locked. Maxwell shot the lock, the sound echoing across the ravine. Inside, emergency lights illuminated a narrow maintenance tunnel stretching beneath the lake. 2 miles to the North Shore pump house, Maxwell explained, voice strained. Security team will find us with the beacon. The tunnel smelled of damp concrete and stale air. Water dripped from overhead pipes as they hurried forward, Alara supporting Maxwell's increasing weight. Reed was right about one thing, he said after several minutes of silence. My mother was trafficked, sold by her family in Russia to pay debts. Escaped when pregnant with me. Alara tightened her grip around his waist. You don't have to explain. I want you to understand. Blood loss made his words slightly slurred. Everything I've built, it started as revenge, became something more. Phoenix was meant to ensure no one else suffered like she did. And Reed corrupted it. Reed saw profit where I saw justice. Maxwell stumbled, leaning heavily against the wall. He infiltrated trafficking networks, not to destroy them, but to exploit them. Used our security contracts to identify women with specific genetic markers. For what purpose? Longevity research, cellular regeneration, women with rare genetic profiles that might hold keys to extended lifespans. His voice hardened. He perverted everything Phoenix stood for. They continued in silence, Maxwell growing weaker with each step. When he stumbled again, Alara guided him to sit against the wall. We need to rest, she insisted, examining his wound. You've lost too much blood. No time, he argued, but lacked strength to stand. Alara activated the beacon, then tore strips from her shirt to bind his arm. The security team will find us. Rest now. His eyes, clouded with pain, fixed on her face. Why are you helping me? After everything that's happened, you should hate me. I believe my father, she said simply. He trusted you. Maxwell's hand found hers, squeezing weakly. I don't deserve that trust. Let me be the judge of that. A distant bang echoed through the tunnel. Footsteps approached. They found us, Maxwell whispered, fumbling for his weapon. Alara took the gun, positioning herself between Maxwell and the approaching threat. She'd never fired a weapon, but aimed steadily as a figure appeared in the dim tunnel light. Stop right there, she ordered. Ms. Mitchell. A man in tactical gear lowered his weapon. Jason Chun, Blackwood Security. We've secured the north entrance. Medical team is inbound. Relief flooded through her. Maxwell's been shot. He needs immediate attention. More security personnel arrived, medics rushing to Maxwell's side. As they stabilized him for transport, Chun updated Alara. Reed escaped in his helicopter, but we captured Dr. Mercer and 3 others. FBI teams have reached the cabin and are securing the evidence. The laptop, Alara reminded them, clutching her backpack. It has everything. The journey to the surface passed in a blur. Outside, evening had fallen, the lake reflecting emergency lights from vehicles and helicopters. Maxwell was loaded into a medical transport while Alara handed the evidence to FBI agents. "You'll need to come in for debriefing," a senior agent told her. "But your safety is our priority now. Reed is still at large." Alara insisted on accompanying Maxwell to the hospital. During the flight, she held his hand while medics worked around her, her thoughts swirling with everything she'd learned. Reed's betrayal, Maxwell's mother, her father's investigation, pieces of a puzzle finally taking shape. At the Aspen Hospital, Maxwell was rushed into surgery while Alara waited, still wearing clothes stained with his blood. Hours passed before a doctor emerged. The surgery was successful. Bullet missed major arteries, but he lost significant blood. "He's stable now." Relief weakened her knees. "Can I see him?" Briefly. "He's still sedated." In the recovery room, machines monitored Maxwell's vital signs. He looked vulnerable in the hospital bed, stripped of the power and control that normally surrounded him. Alara sat beside him, suddenly exhausted. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of their ordeal crashed over her. She rested her head near his hand and closed her eyes. She woke to fingers gently stroking her hair. Maxwell watched her, his eyes clear despite the pain medication. "You're still here," he murmured. "Of course I am." A small smile touched his lips. "No, of course about it. You could have left with the FBI. And miss seeing you in a hospital gown? Never." His smile widened briefly, then faded. "Reed, still missing. But they caught Mercer and the others. And the FBI has the evidence." Maxwell closed his eyes. "Your father's work will save countless lives." "Our work now," she corrected. "I'm seeing this through." His eyes opened, studying her face. "Even after everything I kept from you, you had your reasons. Not good enough ones." He shifted, wincing. "I should have trusted you from the beginning." "Trust is earned," she replied, in both directions. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the steady beep of monitors. Outside the window, snow began falling again, soft flakes illuminated by hospital lights. "What happens now?" Alara finally asked. "Testimony. Trials. Reed has powerful connections. Dismantling his operation won't be easy." "I meant with us." Maxwell's expression softened. "That depends on you. Your contract was never real. You're free to go whenever you choose." "And if I choose to stay?" Hope flickered in his eyes. "Then we rebuild. Phoenix as it was meant to be. Aurea for protection, not profit." He hesitated. "But it's dangerous. Reed won't stop coming for us." "I'm not afraid of Reed. You should be. We all should be." Maxwell's hand found hers. "But we're stronger together than apart." FBI agents arrived the next morning for preliminary statements. By afternoon, the hospital room had become a makeshift command center, with agents, Blackwood security, and Thomas coordinating efforts to track Reed. When Maxwell was strong enough to sit up, he insisted on reviewing the mountain facility evidence. "Reed's operation goes deeper than we realized," he told Alara as they examined files together. "He wasn't just conducting unsanctioned research. He was selling findings to private clients, including tri-state executives. The same people who killed my father." Maxwell nodded grimly. "Your father didn't just uncover financial crimes. He discovered Reed's entire operation." The revelation strengthened Alara's resolve. As days passed, her role evolved from witness to active participant in the investigation. Her pattern recognition skills proved valuable in tracking financial movements connected to Reed. A week after the shooting, Maxwell was released from the hospital. Returning to the mansion required enhanced security protocols. Reed remained at large, his resources still substantial. On their first night back, Alara found Maxwell in the library, examining schematics of the Phoenix server architecture. "You should be resting," she admonished. "Too much to do." He set aside the tablet, studying her. "You've been remarkable through all this. Most people would have broken." "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed. "You're extraordinary." The compliment warmed her. She sat beside him on the leather sofa, close enough to feel his presence, but not touching. "Reed said something at the clearing," she began carefully. "About why you created Phoenix. About your mother." Pain flashed across Maxwell's face. "Another truth I should have shared sooner. Will you tell me now? The real story." Maxwell stared into the fireplace, shadows playing across his features. "Only if you're ready to hear it all," he said finally. "Even the parts I'm not proud of." My mother was 16 when her family in Volgograd sold her to pay gambling debts, Maxwell began, his voice quiet in the library's stillness. She was trafficked through Eastern Europe, eventually reaching America with false papers. I was born in a basement in Brooklyn. Alara listened silently as he continued, sharing details he'd never revealed to anyone. She died when I was 12. Cancer that went untreated because undocumented women can't seek medical care. Before she died, she made me promise to become powerful enough that no one could ever own me. His eyes met Alara's. Everything I've built started from that promise. How did Phoenix begin? After my first security company succeeded, I started tracking trafficking networks, identifying patterns in financial transactions. Reed joined early, brilliant at operations, seemingly committed to the cause. Maxwell's expression hardened. I never suspected he had his own agenda until 3 years ago, when he proposed using our health security contracts to identify women with specific genetic markers for his longevity research. Maxwell nodded. I shut it down immediately, but apparently he continued in secret. The women you saw in the facility, Sophia, Vanessa, Amara, they all had genetic profiles Reed coveted. Their deaths were manufactured to bring them into our orbit. And you didn't notice? I was focused on expanding Phoenix globally. Reed handled regional operations, including domestic recruitment. Shame crossed his features. I failed them. Alara absorbed this, connecting it with her father's evidence. When did you suspect Reed? 6 months ago. Financial discrepancies appeared. Resources diverted from Phoenix to unnamed projects. I began investigating quietly, but Reed was always one step ahead. Maxwell leaned forward, pain evident in his movement. Then your father contacted me. His evidence confirmed my suspicions about Reed, but before we could meet in person, Reed had him killed. Yes, when I learned you were his daughter, I created the debt story to bring you safely into protective custody, while investigating whether I had access to my father's evidence. Maxwell didn't deny it. Initially, yes, but things changed. Their eyes met, acknowledging the unspoken shift in their relationship. What about the other women now? Alara asked. Vanessa and the others? Relocated with new identities, ongoing medical support. Reed's treatments caused cellular anomalies we're still working to understand. Maxwell reached for her hand. I can't undo what happened to them, but I can make sure they're protected for life. The following weeks brought gradual healing, both physical and emotional. Maxwell's wound recovered while he testified in closed FBI hearings. Alara worked with federal analysts to process her father's evidence, identifying trafficking networks across 3 continents. The mansion transformed from prison to partnership. Alara's restricted areas disappeared completely. She moved freely between the residence and laboratories, contributing to both Aurea and Phoenix. 1 month after the shooting, Maxwell called her to his office. Thomas and Harper were already present, along with FBI Special Agent Wilson. Reed's been located, Maxwell announced without preamble. Singapore, attempting to access offshore accounts. Can Singapore authorities apprehend him? Alara asked. Agent Wilson shook his head. He's already moved, but we've frozen his primary assets. He's running out of resources and allies, which makes him more dangerous, Thomas added grimly. Maxwell gestured to a secure tablet. We've received intelligence he's planning a direct assault on this facility. Our security has been enhanced, but I'm recommending temporary relocation for non-essential personnel. I'm not leaving, Alara stated firmly. I expected you'd say that. Maxwell's lips curved slightly, which is why we're all relocating to the secondary facility in Malibu. Reed knows this location too well. The California property proved more secure, a modernist compound overlooking the Pacific with advanced security systems and restricted airspace. From there, they continued coordinating with global law enforcement as arrests decimated Reed's network. Alara found unexpected purpose in the work, applying her analytical skills to identify patterns others missed. When a key witness in the tri-state investigation hesitated to testify, it was Alara who convinced her, one victim's daughter speaking to another. As spring arrived, Maxwell proposed expanding Phoenix's mission. Beyond tracking networks, we need prevention programs. Education, economic opportunities in vulnerable regions. A foundation, Alara suggested, independent from Blackwood Enterprises, focused solely on prevention and survivor support. Would you run it? The question caught her by surprise. Me? I don't have that kind of experience. You have something more valuable, integrity and personal understanding of the stakes. His expression softened. Your father would be proud. The mention of her father triggered an idea. Silverwood Springs, the library's facing budget cuts. What if we started there? A community resource center with specialized programs. Maxwell smiled. Perfect first project. Planning the foundation gave their relationship new dimensions, professional respect evolving alongside personal connection. They worked late hours, shared meals over strategy discussions, gradually blurring lines between colleagues and something more. Yet Maxwell maintained careful distance, never presuming upon the growing attraction between them. The shadow of how they'd met, the false debt, the power imbalance, seemed to restrain him from crossing that final boundary. Until the night Reed made his move. The attack came not at the Malibu compound, but at the renovation site in Silverwood Springs. Maxwell and Alara had traveled there to review construction plans for the new community center. They were finishing a site tour when security alerted them to suspicious activity at the perimeter. Before they could reach their vehicle, gunfire erupted. Maxwell shielded Alara as they retreated into the partially constructed building. Security team is 8 minutes out, he reported, checking his phone while drawing his weapon. Stay behind me. They moved deeper into the unfinished structure. Maxwell's combat training showed as he navigated them through the labyrinth of construction materials. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, not Reed, but one of his mercenaries. Maxwell fired twice, dropping the man, but the noise revealed their position. More attackers converged. They retreated upstairs, finding temporary cover in what would become the library's computer lab. Reed's not here, Maxwell whispered. This is a distraction. From what? The answer came as Maxwell's phone vibrated with an emergency alert. The Malibu compound was simultaneously under attack, a coordinated strike against both locations. He's after the servers, Maxwell realized. All the Phoenix evidence. Gunfire outside intensified as Blackwood security engaged Reed's men. Maxwell searched for an exit route, finding only a partially installed fire escape. We need to reach the roof, he decided. Helicopter extraction. They climbed higher, hearing footsteps following. On the top floor, they encountered another attacker. In the struggle, Maxwell dispatched him, but not before taking a knife slash across his chest. I'm fine, he insisted, though blood soaked his shirt. Keep moving. They reached the roof access as Alara's phone rang. Thomas. Reed breached the server room. He reported urgently. He's downloading Phoenix data. Lock him out, Maxwell ordered. Can't without the master override. He's using your old credentials. Maxwell froze. Only one solution existed, a catastrophic system purge that would erase years of evidence. Execute Protocol Omega, he said heavily. Full system reset. But sir, all the evidence. Do it now. Reed can't get that data. As Thomas complied, Maxwell and Alara emerged onto the roof. Helicopter rotors thudded in the distance. Rescue approaching. You destroyed everything, Alara said, understanding the sacrifice. All your work, not everything. Maxwell nodded toward her. Your father's evidence was backed up separately, and the foundation will continue. The helicopter appeared on the horizon. Then a figure stepped onto the roof behind them. Declan Reed, weapon raised. Touching, he called over the wind. Sacrificing Phoenix to protect your precious victims. His smile was razor sharp. Did you tell her the whole truth, Max? About what really happened to your mother? Maxwell positioned himself in front of Alara. It's over, Reed. Your networks are exposed, your research confiscated. I'll rebuild. I always do. Reed's eyes gleamed with malice. But you won't be around to interfere this time. He fired. Maxwell lunged forward, tackling Reed as the bullet struck his shoulder instead of his heart. They grappled at the roof's edge, both men wounded but fighting with desperate intensity. Alara grabbed a metal pipe from nearby construction materials, swinging it at Reed's head. He staggered, losing his grip on Maxwell. For a heartbeat, Reed teetered on the edge, eyes wide with sudden fear. Then he fell. The helicopter landed as security teams swarmed the building. Medics rushed to Maxwell, who refused treatment until Reed's body was recovered from the construction site below. He's dead, Agent Wilson confirmed 20 minutes later. Maxwell nodded once, then finally allowed the medics to examine his wounds. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, and the knife slash required stitches but wasn't life-threatening. Alara remained by his side during treatment, holding his hand while medics worked. When they were finally alone in the helicopter returning to Malibu, she asked the question that had haunted her since Reed's final words. What truth was Reed talking about? About your mother? Maxwell closed his eyes briefly. My mother wasn't just trafficked. She was specifically selected, like Reed's victims, for genetic research, a previous generation of the same horrific work. His voice grew quieter. Her captors were funded by Tri-State's predecessor company. When I discovered this connection years ago, I nearly destroyed myself seeking vengeance. Is that why you built Phoenix? For revenge. Initially. But revenge is hollow. His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. What gave meaning to Phoenix, what saved me from becoming like Reed, was redirecting that anger toward protection instead of destruction. He squeezed her hand. And then you arrived, showing the same strength your father had. The helicopter touched down at the Malibu compound, where reports confirmed the attack had been repelled with minimal damage. The Phoenix data remained secure thanks to the emergency purge. In the days that followed, investigations into Reed's operations uncovered the full extent of his betrayal, decades of manipulation, dozens of victims, and connections to powerful figures worldwide. Maxwell testified before congressional committees while Alara worked with survivors, her empathy proving as valuable as her analytical skills. 3 months after Reed's death, the Silverwood Springs Community Center opened, the first of many planned facilities combining resources for trafficking prevention with broader community services. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Alara stood beside Maxwell, no longer his captive or employee, but his equal partner in the foundation they'd built together. That evening, watching sunset from the center's rooftop garden, Maxwell finally broached the subject they'd both avoided. Your contract ended long ago, he said quietly. You're free to build whatever life you want now. Alara turned to face him. I've already chosen the life I want. And what life is that? One where I continue my father's work. One where I help build something meaningful. She stepped closer. One with you, if that's what you want to. The distance he'd maintained dissolved as he drew her into his arms. Their first real kiss held the weight of everything they'd overcome. Manipulation and truth, danger and rescue, loss and discovery. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her lips. No one deserves anyone, she replied. We choose each other, every day, despite our flaws. As night fell over Silverwood Springs, they remained on the rooftop, planning not just their foundation's future, but their own. A partnership forged in crisis, but sustained by something neither had expected to find. Trust, purpose, and a love that had transformed them both. 1 year after Reed's death, the Aspen mansion stood transformed. Security walls replaced with glass, laboratories repurposed for humanitarian work, and Maxwell's imposing office now a command center for survivor support programs worldwide. In the gardens, workers constructed a pavilion for the day's events, the Phoenix Foundation launch, and, later, a more private celebration. Alara reviewed her notes, her engagement ring catching the light. The proposal had come 3 months earlier during a quiet walk on the Malibu beach. No grand gestures, just a simple question acknowledging their extraordinary journey. Ready? Maxwell asked from the doorway. As I'll be, she replied. Vanessa arrived with the other survivors. How many attendees now? 78. Law enforcement, advocates, politicians. She studied his face. Second thoughts. No, Phoenix needs visibility now. He gazed at the arriving guest. Your father understood the power of public accountability before I did. The mention of her father brought that familiar bittersweet feeling. Robert Mitchell's evidence had led to dozens of convictions. His commendations filled a wall in the Foundation's memorial hall. He would have loved seeing this, she said. Especially you in regular clothes instead of those pretentious suits. His smile came easily now. The man who once terrified her shared his vulnerabilities freely, while she had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. By noon, the gardens filled with guests, congressional representatives, international law enforcement, and most importantly, survivors whose lives had been transformed by their work. Vanessa approached Alara near the refreshment table. The governor just arrived with 2 senators. Your political reach is expanding. Maxwell's reach, not mine. That's not what I hear. The UN panel specifically requested you. As ceremony time approached, Maxwell found Alara in a quiet corner. Do you ever think about that first night? When I arrived here, often. I was cruel. You were protecting yourself. And me, in your way. She closed her notes. We both had walls then. Yours were more justified. She touched his face. We're not defined by how we start, but by what we build. The ceremony proceeded with precision. As Alara took the podium as the Foundation's executive director, She felt momentary fear before seeing Maxwell's pride. The Phoenix Foundation began with one man's promise to his mother. She started. A promise that grew into a mission, was nearly destroyed by betrayal, and was ultimately saved by truth. My journey began with loss. My father's courage cost him his life, but his legacy lives in every person we help. She concluded to a standing ovation. Afterward, Maxwell led her to the library that had been her refuge during captivity and presented a package containing her father's bookmark mounted alongside a photograph and a never-sent letter. He knew the risks her father had written, but some fights are worth fighting, even when the cost is high. He never doubted you, she whispered to Maxwell. He was a better judge of character than I deserved. As evening deepened, the Foundation launch transitioned into an intimate wedding. Under the pavilion's lights, with mountains as witnesses, they exchanged vows acknowledging their unconventional beginning. From possession to partnership, Maxwell promised. From control to trust. From captivity to choice, Elara responded. From fear to courage. The reception unfolded with genuine joy, survivors dancing with FBI agents, corporate donors mingling with activists, boundaries dissolving in celebration. Near midnight, Maxwell found Elara on the balcony overlooking the valley. 1 year ago I was planning escape routes, she said. Now I'm planning our future. The house was always just a structure. You transformed it into a home. We transformed it. And each other. They stood watching distant lights, comfortable in silence born of true intimacy. Reed's research has been adapted by legitimate scientists, Maxwell said eventually. It may actually help treat rare diseases. Something good from something terrible, Elara mused. Like us. The music floated up to their sanctuary, notes of darkness and light intertwining to create something unexpectedly beautiful. Ready to return to our guests, Mrs. Blackwood? Maxwell asked, offering his hand. Elara took it, her decision made freely, her path chosen with open eyes. Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood. Together they rejoined the celebration. Two phoenixes reborn from ashes neither had created but both had transcended, their shared flight only just beginning.